My husband destroyed my art studio after his friends made fun of it. He broke my dead grandmother's irreplaceable figurines and said accidents happen, so I showed him what divorce papers look like. I, 27F, need some advice about what happened with my husband Sebastian, 30M. This whole situation has gotten out of hand and I don't know what to do anymore. Let me start with some background. I grew up in a really unstable home. My parents had serious addiction problems and would disappear for days at a time. There were nights when I was 8 or 9 years old where I had to figure out dinner for myself because they were passed out or gone. My older brother tried to help when he could, but he was only 14 and dealing with his own problems. When I was 12, child services finally got involved after a neighbor reported seeing me walking to the grocery store alone at midnight to buy food with money I found in my mom's purse. I spent the rest of my childhood bouncing between foster homes and staying with my grandmother when she could take me. My grandmother was the only stable adult in my life. She taught me how to paint watercolors when I was 13. She had this little sunroom in her house that she turned into an art space, and I would spend hours there painting flowers and landscapes. She always told me that art was my way of creating something beautiful in a world that had shown me too much ugly. When I turned 18, I aged out of the system. I had saved up money from part-time jobs throughout high school and got a small scholarship to community college. I studied accounting because I wanted a stable career that would give me financial security. I never wanted to worry about where my next meal was coming from or whether I would have a roof over my head. I worked full-time while going to school part-time. It took me 6 years to finish my degree, but I did it. During that time, I kept painting as a hobby. I would buy cheap supplies from discount stores and paint in my tiny studio apartment. It kept me grounded when everything else felt chaotic. By the time I was 25, I had a good job at an accounting firm and had saved enough money to rent a decent apartment. That's when I met Sebastian at a work conference. He worked for a client company and we started talking during a lunch break. He seemed charming and successful. He had grown up in an upper-middle-class family, went to private schools, and had his college paid for by his parents. His biggest childhood trauma was when his parents got him a Honda instead of a BMW for his 16th birthday. We started dating and things moved quickly. Sebastian was different from anyone I had dated before. He took me to nice restaurants and planned elaborate weekend trips. He seemed impressed by my independence and work ethic. He would tell people about how I had put myself through college and built a career from nothing. At first, I thought he admired my strength. When we got engaged after 2 years of dating, I was honest with him about my past. I told him about my parents' addiction, about the foster homes, about nights when I went to bed hungry. Sebastian would nod and say supportive things, but I could tell he didn't really understand. Once, when I mentioned that I still had nightmares sometimes about being left alone as a child, he suggested I just think positive thoughts before bed. We decided to move in together 6 months before our wedding. I insisted on finding a place with an extra bedroom that I could use as an art studio. Sebastian agreed, though he seemed a bit confused about why I needed a whole room just for painting. We found a 3-bedroom house with a good rental price. The 3rd bedroom was small but had great natural light from 2 windows. I spent weeks setting up my art studio. I bought a proper easel, organized my supplies in clear storage containers, and set up a comfortable reading chair in the corner. The walls were painted a soft sage green, and I hung some of my favorite pieces that I had painted over the years. I had plants on the windowsills and a small bookshelf filled with art books. There was also a collection of ceramic figurines that my grandmother had left me when she passed away 2 years earlier. They were mostly small animals and fairy tale characters, painted in bright colors. My grandmother had collected them for decades, and looking at them reminded me of the afternoons we spent painting together in her sunroom. Sebastian was fine with the art studio at first. He even bragged to his coworkers about his artistic girlfriend. But I noticed that he never spent time in the room with me. When I invited him to see a painting I was working on, he would glance at it quickly and say it looked nice before changing the subject. His attitude started to shift after we got married. He began making comments about the time I spent painting. If I went into my studio after dinner, he would ask why I preferred paintbrushes to spending time with my husband. When I explained that painting helped me relax after stressful days at work, he said I should try watching TV with him instead. Things got worse around our first Christmas as a married couple. Sebastian invited his college friends over for a holiday party. I was working late that night on a year-end audit, so I got home after most of the guests had already arrived. When I walked through the house to greet everyone, I noticed that the door to my art studio was open. I always kept it closed when we had company. Later, when I was helping clean up, I overheard 2 of his friends talking in the kitchen. They were laughing about my art room, calling it childish and weird. One of them said he couldn't believe Sebastian let his wife turn a whole bedroom into a playroom. Another friend joked that the ceramic figurines made it look like a little girl's dollhouse. I went to check on my studio and found that someone had moved things around. My paints were out of order, and one of my brushes was on the floor. A few of the ceramic figurines had been repositioned, and I could tell people had been handling them. I felt like my private space had been invaded. When I mentioned it to Sebastian later that night, he got defensive. He said his friends were just curious about my hobby and that I was being too sensitive. He told me that maybe I should consider moving my art supplies to the basement so guests wouldn't accidentally wander into the room. I explained that the studio meant a lot to me and that I needed the natural light from the windows to paint properly. Sebastian rolled his eyes and said I was being dramatic. He pointed out that his friends were successful professionals and that their opinions mattered for his career. He suggested that having a more mature home setup would be better for entertaining clients and colleagues. Over the next few months, Sebastian kept pushing for me to relocate my art supplies. He started referring to my studio as the spare bedroom and would mention to visitors that we were thinking of turning it into a home office. He began leaving his work papers on my easel and using my art table as a desk for his laptop. The breaking point came in March when Sebastian planned another dinner party. This time it was for his work colleagues, including his new boss who had just transferred from the corporate office. Sebastian spent the week before the party stressing about making a good impression. He hired a cleaning service and bought new furniture for the living room. The day of the party, I came home from work to find Sebastian in my art studio with 2 large cardboard boxes. He was taking down my paintings from the walls and packing up my supplies. He had already put most of my grandmother's ceramic figurines into one of the boxes. I asked him what he was doing. Sebastian said he had decided to temporarily convert the room into a proper guest room for the evening. He had bought a futon and some generic wall art at a furniture store. He said his boss would be impressed that we had a dedicated guest space instead of a craft room. I told him he couldn't pack up my studio without asking me first. Sebastian got annoyed and said he was trying to advance his career and that I should be more supportive. He said we could set everything back up after the party, though he suggested it might be a good time to thin out some of my supplies anyway. I watched him put the last of my grandmother's figurines into the box. Some of them were delicate and he wasn't being careful with the wrapping. When I tried to take the box from him to pack them properly, he pulled it away and said I was being controlling. That evening, I spent the dinner party in our bedroom. I couldn't bear to see my art studio turned into a generic guest room with a cheap futon and mass-produced prints on the walls. Sebastian introduced me to his colleagues as his wife who worked in accounting, but he didn't mention anything about my painting. After the guests left, I went to check on my supplies. Sebastian had shoved the boxes into the basement storage area, stacking them carelessly behind holiday decorations and old furniture. When I opened the box with my grandmother's figurines, I found that 3 of them had broken. The pieces were still in the box, but seeing them shattered made me sit down on the basement floor for a long time. I didn't say anything to Sebastian that night. The next morning, he was in a great mood because his boss had complimented our home and mentioned that Sebastian seemed like someone who had his priorities straight. Sebastian said he was proud that we had made such a professional impression. I spent the weekend trying to set up my studio again, but something felt different. The room had been violated in a way that I couldn't explain. Sebastian kept making suggestions about how I could reorganize the space to make it more multi-purpose. He brought up the idea of getting a Murphy bed so the room could function as both an art studio and a guest room. Last week, Sebastian told me that his boss wanted to come over for dinner again and bring his wife this time. He said it could be an important career opportunity and that he wanted everything to be perfect. Then he casually mentioned that he thought it would be better if I moved my art supplies permanently to the basement so we could have a proper guest bedroom. I told him no. I explained that I needed that room for my painting and that it represented something important to me. Sebastian said I was being selfish and that a good wife should support her husband's career goals. He said his boss had grown children and would probably find my art supplies immature anyway. That's when I realized that Sebastian had never understood what my art studio meant to me. It wasn't just a hobby room. It was the first space in my entire life that had belonged completely to me. Growing up, I had never had privacy or ownership of anything. Even in foster care, I was always sharing bedrooms and never knew when I might have to pack up and move again. My art studio represented stability and peace. It was where I could create something beautiful and meaningful. It was where I felt connected to my grandmother and to the happiest memories from my childhood. Having that space made me feel like I had finally built a real home for myself. But Sebastian couldn't see any of that. To him, it was just a room full of paint and childish decorations that embarrassed him in front of his professional contacts. He saw my art as a cute hobby that should be subordinate to his career advancement. Now I'm supposed to have dinner with his boss again tomorrow night, and Sebastian keeps bringing up his idea about converting my studio to a guest room. He's been looking at Murphy beds online and showing me pictures. He acts like it's a reasonable compromise, but I know that once my supplies get moved to the basement, they'll never come back upstairs. I don't know what to do. Sebastian is my husband and I want to support his career, but I can't give up the one space in our home that feels like mine. At the same time, I'm starting to wonder if there's something wrong with me for caring so much about a room full of art supplies. Sebastian went ahead with his dinner party despite my objections about converting my studio. The day before his boss was supposed to come over, I came home from work to find that he had already moved all of my art supplies to the basement again. This time, he had arranged for his brother to help him set up a full guest bedroom with a new bed, nightstands, and coordinated bedding. When I saw what he had done, I told him that we had discussed this and I had said no. Sebastian replied that he had made an executive decision for the good of our marriage. He said his boss had specifically mentioned wanting to see our guest room because he was thinking of having his elderly mother come visit for an extended stay and wanted ideas for setting up a comfortable space for older guests. I went down to the basement to check on my supplies. This time, Sebastian had been even more careless with packing. My easel was disassembled and leaning against a wall behind some storage shelves. I had to move Christmas decorations and old furniture just to get to the boxes with my paints and brushes. When I found the box with my grandmother's ceramic figurines, I discovered that 5 more had broken during the move. Some of them were completely shattered. I brought the box of broken figurines upstairs and showed them to Sebastian. I explained that these had belonged to my grandmother and that they couldn't be replaced. Sebastian looked annoyed and said that accidents happen when you move delicate items. He suggested that maybe it was time for me to let go of old things anyway and focus on our future together. The dinner party was a disaster from my perspective, though Sebastian thought it went well. His boss and his wife were polite enough, but I spent most of the evening hiding in our bedroom again. Every time I walked past what used to be my studio, I saw strangers admiring the generic guest room that had replaced my sacred space. After the guests left, Sebastian was thrilled. His boss had been impressed with our hospitality and had hinted about a possible promotion. Sebastian said he was proud that we had made such a good impression and that sacrificing my art room had been worth it for his career prospects. I asked when I could move my supplies back upstairs. Sebastian said he had been thinking about that, and he believed we should keep the room as a guest bedroom permanently. He said his boss might want to bring clients by the house occasionally, and having a proper guest room would be useful. He promised to help me set up a nice art corner in the basement with better lighting. That's when I decided to look into our rental agreement. I had always been careful about paperwork and contracts because of my accounting background. When I read through our lease, I discovered something interesting. Both of our names were on the lease as tenants, but the lease specifically mentioned that any modifications to the property required written consent from all tenants. I realized that Sebastian had been making changes to our living space without my permission, which violated our lease agreement. More importantly, I started thinking about our financial situation. Sebastian always talked about his career and his income as if he was the primary breadwinner, but when I actually looked at our bank statements, I discovered that I had been contributing more to our household expenses than he had. Sebastian made a decent salary, but he also had student loan payments, a car loan, and credit card debt from his expensive lifestyle before we got married. Most of his paycheck went toward his personal expenses. I, on the other hand, had been debt-free for 3 years and had been contributing more toward rent, utilities, and groceries. I had also been the one building our emergency savings account. While Sebastian spent money on expensive dinners and gadgets, I had been putting aside money every month. I had accumulated a significant amount in savings that Sebastian didn't even know about because I kept it in a separate account that I had opened before we got married. The next week, I decided to have a serious conversation with Sebastian about our living arrangements. I explained that I wanted my art studio back and that I was willing to compromise by allowing him to use the room occasionally for work guests, but I wouldn't give it up permanently. Sebastian became defensive and said that I was being stubborn and selfish. He said that his career was more important than my hobby and that a good wife would prioritize her husband's success. He brought up the fact that his boss had complimented our guest room and said that maintaining that impression was crucial for his advancement. I pointed out that I was contributing more financially to our household than he was and that I had an equal say in how our home was arranged. Sebastian got angry and said that money wasn't everything and that his career potential was more valuable than my current income. He said that once he got promoted, he would be the primary breadwinner and we could revisit the room arrangement then. That conversation made me realize how little respect Sebastian had for my contributions to our marriage. He saw my income as temporary and less important than his career ambitions. He viewed my art as a dispensable hobby rather than something meaningful to me. I decided to take action. I contacted our landlord and explained the situation. I asked if there was any way to modify our living arrangements or if there were other properties available. The landlord mentioned that he owned several rental properties and that one of his tenants in a 2-bedroom house nearby was planning to move out at the end of the month. The rent for the 2-bedroom house was actually lower than what we were currently paying, and it had a sunroom that would be perfect for an art studio. The landlord said he would be happy to transfer my lease to the new property if I was interested. I went to see the house that weekend while Sebastian was playing golf with his coworkers. The sunroom was beautiful, with windows on 3 sides and excellent natural light. I could picture my easel set up there, with my supplies organized on shelves along the walls. There was even built-in storage that would be perfect for my canvases. I put down a deposit that day. The landlord said I could move in within 2 weeks. I haven't told Sebastian yet, but I've been secretly packing my personal belongings and art supplies. I plan to tell him this weekend that I'm moving out. I know this seems like a drastic step, but I realize now that Sebastian and I have fundamentally different values. He sees my art as an obstacle to his ambitions, while I see it as an essential part of who I am. He's willing to sacrifice my happiness for his career advancement, while I believe marriage should be about supporting each other's dreams. The broken ceramic figurines were the final straw. Those weren't just decorations to me, they were the last connection I had to my grandmother and to the stable, loving relationship that had sustained me through my difficult childhood. The fact that Sebastian could carelessly break them and then suggest I should get rid of old things showed me how little he understood or valued what mattered to me. I'm nervous about living alone again, but I'm also excited about having my own space where I can paint without worry about someone else's approval. I've been looking forward to setting up my new studio and getting back to creating art without the constant stress of defending my right to have that space. When I told him I was moving out, his first reaction was to laugh. He said I was being ridiculous and that I would change my mind once I realized how expensive it would be to live alone. He seemed to think I was bluffing to get attention. When I showed him the lease for my new place and started loading my art supplies into my car, Sebastian finally realized I was serious. He became angry and accused me of abandoning our marriage over paint and brushes. He said I was throwing away our relationship for selfish reasons and that his friends had been right about me being immature. The move itself was easier than I expected. I had been gradually taking my belongings to the new house over the past 2 weeks, so there wasn't much left to pack on the final day. Sebastian refused to help me move anything. He sat in the living room watching television while I carried boxes out to my car. My new place is wonderful. The sunroom is even better than I had hoped. I spent the first week just setting up my art studio, organizing my supplies, and hanging my paintings on the walls. I was able to salvage most of my grandmother's ceramic figurines, though several are still broken. I put them on a special shelf where I can see them while I paint. For the first time in months, I felt peaceful while working on a painting. I had forgotten how much I enjoyed the process when I wasn't worrying about someone walking in and criticizing my space or my work. Sebastian called me several times during my first week in the new house. Initially, he was angry and demanding that I come home. He said I was embarrassing him by moving out over such a trivial disagreement. He claimed his coworkers were asking questions about where I was, and he didn't know what to tell them. After a few days, his tone changed. He started apologizing and saying he missed me. He promised that we could work out a compromise about the art studio if I moved back home. He said he had been stressed about work and hadn't meant to be inconsiderate about my hobby. I told him that my art wasn't just a hobby and that the problem wasn't just about the room. The real issue was that he didn't respect my needs or contributions to our marriage. He had repeatedly ignored my wishes and made unilateral decisions about our living space. He had also dismissed my financial contributions and treated my income as less important than his career prospects. Sebastian said I was overreacting and that all married couples had to make compromises. He pointed out that he had never tried to stop me from painting, just from using the spare bedroom as an art studio. He said it wasn't unreasonable for him to want a guest room in our home. I explained that forcing me to move my art supplies to the basement wasn't a compromise. It was him getting everything he wanted while I got nothing I needed. I also pointed out that he had broken my grandmother's figurines through careless handling and had shown no remorse about damaging something irreplaceable and meaningful to me. Last week, things took an unexpected turn. Sebastian's brother called me and asked if we could meet for coffee. He said he was concerned about Sebastian and wanted to understand my perspective on what had happened in our marriage. During our conversation, Sebastian's brother revealed some information that I hadn't known before. He told me that Sebastian had been complaining about our marriage to his family for months. Sebastian had been telling them that I was difficult and controlling, and that I cared more about my art supplies than about supporting his career. But Sebastian's brother also told me that he had been at our house during the dinner party with Sebastian's boss. He had seen the guest room that used to be my art studio, and he had noticed my art supplies stacked carelessly in the basement. He said he thought Sebastian had been wrong to pack up my things without my permission. More importantly, Sebastian's brother told me that Sebastian had been lying about his financial situation. While Sebastian had been telling everyone that he was the breadwinner in our marriage, his brother knew that Sebastian had been struggling with debt and that I had been covering most of our household expenses. Sebastian's brother apologized for not speaking up sooner. He said he had tried to talk to Sebastian about treating me better, but Sebastian had dismissed his concerns. He thought I should know that not everyone in Sebastian's family supported his behavior. This conversation made me realize that Sebastian had been misrepresenting our relationship to his family and friends. He had been portraying himself as a successful husband whose wife was causing problems, when in reality, I had been the more financially stable partner who was being forced to give up something important to me. A few days after meeting with Sebastian's brother, I received an unexpected visit from Sebastian himself. He showed up at my new house in the evening, claiming he wanted to see where I was living. I let him in because I thought we should have a mature conversation about our situation. Sebastian walked through my house, making comments about how small it was compared to our previous place. When he saw my art studio in the sunroom, he said it looked nice but pointed out that I could have had the same setup in the basement of our old house if I had been willing to compromise. Then Sebastian said something that revealed his true feelings about our marriage. He told me that his boss had been asking about me and wondering why I wasn't at company events anymore. Sebastian said he had been telling people that I was visiting my family, but he was running out of excuses. He said that my absence was starting to affect his professional reputation. His boss had mentioned that successful executives usually have supportive wives who participated in company social functions. Sebastian was worried that being separated from his wife would hurt his chances for promotion. I realized that Sebastian wasn't asking me to come back because he missed me or because he wanted to repair our relationship. He wanted me to return because my absence was inconvenient for his career ambitions. Even his apologies and promises about the art studio were motivated by his professional concerns rather than any genuine understanding of what he had done wrong. I told Sebastian that I wouldn't be coming back and that I thought we should start divorce proceedings. Sebastian became angry and said I was making a mistake that I would regret. He said I would never find another husband who would tolerate my childish interests and that I was throwing away a good marriage over stupid art supplies. After he left, I sat in my sunroom and painted until late that night. I realized that for the first time in years, I was creating art without any anxiety about someone interrupting me or criticizing my work. The painting turned out better than anything I had done in months. I contacted a divorce attorney this week. The initial consultation confirmed what I had suspected. Since I had been contributing more financially to our marriage and we didn't have any shared assets like a house or car, the divorce should be relatively straightforward. I also learned that Sebastian would be responsible for the remainder of our old lease since his name was still on that rental agreement. Since I had been paying most of the rent anyway, this wouldn't create any financial hardship for me. My new life is quiet but satisfying. I come home from work each day and spend time in my art studio without worrying about anyone's approval. I've started working on a series of paintings inspired by my grandmother's flower garden. The ceramic figurines sit on their shelf where I can see them while I work, reminding me of the afternoons we spent painting together when I was young. I know some people might think I ended my marriage over something trivial, but I've learned that small things can reveal big problems. Sebastian's inability to respect my art studio showed me that he didn't respect me as a person. His willingness to break my grandmother's figurines and dismiss their importance to me revealed his lack of empathy and understanding. I'm not sure what comes next, but I'm grateful to have found the courage to prioritize my own happiness and well-being. Update 3: The divorce paperwork is almost finalized. Sebastian initially tried to contest some of the financial arrangements, but his lawyer advised him that since I had documentation proving my higher contributions to our household expenses, he was unlikely to receive any support payments or asset division in his favor. Sebastian has been spreading his version of events to our mutual friends and his family members. According to what people have told me, he's claiming that I abandoned our marriage because I cared more about my art hobby than about being a supportive wife. He's been portraying himself as the victim of an unreasonable woman who left him over a minor disagreement about room arrangements. Most of our mutual friends have taken his side, which was expected since they were primarily his friends to begin with. I've received a few messages from people telling me that I made a mistake and that Sebastian was a good husband who deserved better treatment. One of his female coworkers even called me to say that Sebastian was heartbroken and that I should reconsider my decision. I've stopped trying to explain my perspective to people who have already made up their minds. The few people who have asked for my side of the story have been supportive once they understood what really happened. Sebastian's brother has remained in contact with me and has confirmed that Sebastian continues to misrepresent the situation to his family. 3 weeks ago, something happened that validated my decision to leave Sebastian. I was working late at the office when I received a call from my new landlord. He said that someone had been seen near my house earlier that day, looking through windows and trying door handles. A neighbor had called the police, but by the time officers arrived, the person was gone. The landlord asked if I had given anyone permission to access the property. I told him no and asked if there had been any damage. He said nothing appeared to be broken, but he recommended that I check to make sure all my belongings were secure when I got home. When I arrived at my house that evening, I found that someone had indeed been there. My front door was still locked, but the back door leading to my sunroom had been forced open. The lock was damaged and the door frame was splintered. Inside, I discovered that my art studio had been vandalized. Paintings had been pulled down from the walls and scattered on the floor. My supplies were dumped out of their storage containers and mixed together. Several tubes of paint had been squeezed out onto my easel and work table. My grandmother's ceramic figurines had been swept off their shelf, and most of them were now completely destroyed. I called the police immediately. When the officers arrived, they documented the damage and took photographs of the scene. They asked if I had any idea who might have done this. I explained about my recent separation from Sebastian and mentioned that he had been angry about my decision to leave him. The police said they would investigate, but they warned me that without witnesses or direct evidence, it would be difficult to prove who was responsible for the break-in. They advised me to install security cameras and to consider getting a restraining order if I felt unsafe. I spent that night cleaning up the mess in my sunroom. Most of my paintings could be salvaged, though several had been torn or stained with paint. My supplies were mostly recoverable once I separated and cleaned them. But my grandmother's ceramic figurines were a total loss. The few pieces that had survived Sebastian's careless packing were now smashed beyond repair. I sat on the floor of my sunroom surrounded by broken ceramic pieces, and I realized that someone had deliberately destroyed the last physical connection I had to my grandmother. These weren't just decorative objects, they were irreplaceable mementos of the only stable, loving relationship from my childhood. The next day, I contacted the divorce attorney and asked about getting a restraining order. The attorney said that while we couldn't prove Sebastian had committed the vandalism, the timing and nature of the damage suggested it was likely him or someone acting on his behalf. I also called a security company and had cameras installed around my property. The technician said that many people were surprised by how often domestic disputes escalated to property damage, and he recommended additional security measures like motion sensor lights and reinforced door locks. 2 days later, I received a phone call from Sebastian's brother. He sounded upset and said he needed to tell me something important. He explained that Sebastian had been drinking heavily since our separation and had been making increasingly bitter comments about me to family members. Sebastian's brother said that during a family dinner the previous weekend, Sebastian had made comments about teaching me a lesson and showing me what happened to women who abandon their husbands over trivial things. When other family members asked what he meant, Sebastian had laughed and said I would understand soon enough. Sebastian's brother apologized for not calling me sooner. He said he hadn't taken Sebastian's threat seriously at the time, but after hearing about the break-in at my house, he was worried that Sebastian might have been involved. I shared this information with the police and my attorney. The attorney said that while Sebastian's comments weren't a direct confession, they could be used as evidence of his state of mind and potential motive if charges were filed. Last week, the police called to tell me that they had reviewed security camera footage from a business near my house. The cameras had captured a car matching the description of Sebastian's vehicle in the area around the time of the break-in. The footage wasn't clear enough to identify the driver definitively, but it supported the theory that Sebastian was responsible for the vandalism. Armed with this evidence, my attorney filed for a restraining order. The judge granted a temporary order and scheduled a hearing for next week to determine if it should be made permanent. Sebastian contacted me through his attorney, claiming he had nothing to do with the break-in and suggesting that I was trying to frame him to gain an advantage in our divorce proceedings. His lawyer warned that making false accusations could backfire during the divorce settlement. I'm not interested in revenge or punishment. I just want Sebastian to leave me alone so I can rebuild my life. The restraining order will legally require him to stay away from me and my property, which is all I really need. I've been working on replacing what was destroyed in the vandalism. I can't replace my grandmother's figurines, but I've started a new series of paintings based on my memories of her garden. In a way, creating these paintings has been more meaningful than just looking at her old collectibles. My new life is peaceful. I come home each day to a house that belongs entirely to me, where I can paint without worrying about someone else's approval or interference. I've made friends with some of my neighbors, including an elderly woman who also enjoys watercolor painting. We sometimes paint together in my sunroom on weekend afternoons. The divorce should be final within the next month. I'm looking forward to closing this chapter of my life and focusing on my art and my career. I've even been thinking about taking some advanced painting classes at the community college or perhaps joining a local art group. I know some people think I overreacted by ending my marriage over an art room, but I understand now that it was never really about the room itself. It was about respect, autonomy, and the right to have something that belonged to me. Sebastian's actions showed me that he saw me as an accessory to his life rather than as an equal partner with my own needs and interests. I'm grateful that I found the strength to leave before things got even worse. Living alone has reminded me of who I was before I got married, and I've rediscovered the sense of independence and self-reliance that helped me survive my difficult childhood. My art studio is once again a place of peace and creativity. I've hung my paintings back on the walls, organized my supplies in neat containers, and set up a comfortable reading chair by the windows. It's exactly what I always wanted, a space that belongs entirely to me, where I can create something beautiful without anyone's permission or approval.